Hi, everybody. Welcome to Friends Talk Money. I'm Pam Kruger, co-host of Money Track on public television and founder of WealthRamp.com.
I'm Richard Eisenberg, a personal finance writer and editor, and formerly the editor of the Money and Work channels for the PBS site for people over 50, nextavenue.org.
And I'm Terry Savage, nationally syndicated personal finance columnist and the author of The Savage Truth on Money.
We're three friends who like to talk money and all the issues that come with it.
On this podcast, we're trying to help you understand your personal finances
to get you and your retirement on the right path for true financial peace of mind.
Hi, everybody. On today's Friends Talk Money, we're going to talk about a fantasy that I think a lot of people have as they get older, and that's retiring abroad. Now that the weather's turning a little cooler in many parts of the country, you might be thinking about what it'd be like to live in a warmer climate or a place where the weather is great all year round. Or maybe you're even thinking about moving to a country where the cost of living is not quite as high as it is in the United States. Retiring abroad can be a great move for some people, but it can also carry some risks, some financial complications. We want to talk about those today. And there's something especially concerning going on right now in a very popular place for retiring abroad, and we're going to get into that. But before we dive into all these tricky parts about retiring abroad, I wanted to ask my friends, Pam Kruger and Terry Savage, what they think about retiring abroad. Is it something you've thought about for yourself? Pam?
I have. I also think that a lot is going to happen between now and then, but my vision is to spend at least part of my typical year in retirement in another country. Now, the reason I say that is because I want to test the waters first. So year one, maybe I spend a couple of months in South America. Maybe next year it's Greece. So I have to be there, for me, for at least 2 months before I would really know for sure. And the people in my life who have just retired to Portugal tell me that the cost of living there, and this is really appealing, is almost half what it costs to live here. So I'm going to try on a couple of different countries first. Then I'm going to see what fits for me. Then during that 2 months, that might turn into 6 months. And that's how I'll do it step by step. So yeah, I guess I have a vision.
Interesting. Terry, what about you?
I don't get that at all. Fortunately, I was able to live abroad earlier in my life. I lived in the south of France for a while, and then I lived in London for a year. So I got it's not that I'm scared of retiring abroad, but from the perspective of someone who is closer to being able to make that choice, I will tell you, I have a lot of reservations, very practical ones, about retiring abroad. So, Richard, I'll share those with you as we go throughout the podcast, but I think you might want to think twice and even 3 times before considering retirement abroad.
Okay, well, there we have 2 very different answers. Now, my wife and I, we are what I call unretired. We've left our full-time jobs. We're both journalists. We now do freelancing in our retirement. We've decided we don't want to retire abroad, but we do want to visit a lot of countries. And one country that's been very popular with expats recently, we've never been there, is Ecuador in South America. It's often been on those best places to retire lists abroad. And things are not so sunny in Ecuador right now, sunny Ecuador. I just wrote about that for Next Avenue. The Wall Street Journal ran a story called Ecuador was a retirement paradise for Americans, then the drug gangs arrived. And the New York Times had a piece called How Narco Traffickers Unleashed Violence and Chaos in Ecuador. Those are stories whose headlines do not make you want to run over to Ecuador, but it turns out it's not quite as bad as those headlines might sound. And I don't want to overstate the situation. Not all of Ecuador is being overrun by drug cartels or violence. In fact, many parts of Ecuador are just as great for expats as they have been for a long time. I talked to 2 expats who love Ecuador. They live there now. They've lived there for a while, Cynthia and Ed Staton. They live high up in the Andes in Ecuador, and they told me why they love where they live in Cuenca, Ecuador.
And people are out all the time, every morning, doing their thing, the Zumba class across the river. I walk to yoga. We both walk to the gym. It's just daily life for us, and many other Ecuadorians is not affected by this.
Kathleen Petticord publishes something called Live and Invest Overseas. They choose communities and regions to retire abroad every year, not countries. She told me she believes Ecuador's safety problems are localized and temporary. And that could be true, but I will say that the US State Department has given the entire country of Ecuador a level 2 warning, which means exercise increased caution. There are 4 areas in Ecuador that the State Department has a level 4 do not travel warning, and 5 other spots that are level 3 reconsider travel. So to me, what that says is you really need to know what life is like right now in a place you're considering retiring abroad, and not the whole country, but a particular place. Don't go off a list you saw a few years ago. So let me stop there and ask Pam and Terry, do you have any thoughts about that, about checking out safety in a place that you're thinking about living abroad? Pam, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think about it a lot. For me, the whole appeal of living someplace else and is feeling the freedom, some sense of freedom. Now, I'm not going to be free and I'm not going to be comfortable as the world shifts and it changes unless I truly feel that I'm safe. So I'm probably like Cynthia. Okay, I'm going to want to walk to Zumba. I'm going to want to take my swim by myself. But the second that I feel like I have to carry a weapon to do it, I'm gone. So for me, it's safety first.
Well, I don't think that's, Richard, I don't think that's a question even about retiring abroad. I always assumed I'd retire in my hometown of Chicago, where I've lived all my life, except for winter months where I would be obviously someplace warm. But I'll tell you something. I mean, if Ecuador is a level 2, I think of Chicago, and it pains me to say it, as a level 3. You know, the smash and grabs, the carjackings, there is, whether
not all of Chicago, not every part of Chicago.
Talking about Michigan Avenue, and I live right off Michigan Avenue.
Yeah,
I'm
and Union
about the
Square in
nice
San Francisco too. Same thing.
Yeah, I'm talking about, okay, San Francisco. I'm talking about going out to dinner with a girlfriend. I'm talking about just walking down the street. There's always an awareness that you have to have. And so I think safety for sure is a #1 consideration, but there could be an issue even in America, is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Okay, fair point. And Terry, I know you also have some thoughts about healthcare for retiring abroad. What do you want people to know about that?
I have a lot for you to know. So I actually made some notes on this, because while you two are wondering about how you're going to get to your Zumba class, okay, when you get a little older, you're going to think, wait a minute, what about doctors? What about hospitals? And what about insurance? I'm not saying that there aren't some countries where they have wonderful doctors and hospitals, but let's talk about insurance, because item #1, Medicare does not cover you,
That's right.
except in the United States and its territories. So if you're going to move to Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands, you would be covered by Medicare. So what kind of insurance do you get, and where do you find it? Well, we're not talking about travel insurance. If you're Pam, you're going to go down there for 2 or 3 months, you for sure are going to want travel insurance, assuming whatever other insurance, but even Obamacare doesn't cover
but
you.
Carrie, I'm going to have any surgeries or any big stuff that I'm going to do in the United States, and Medicare.
Oh yeah, and you're going to be just in control of that the day that they say, oops, you've just had a mini stroke or something. You're going to say, okay, let me get to the airport. I'm sure I feel better enough to fly back to the United States, etc. No. So if you are going to live abroad, remind me to say that you might even want to keep your Medicare and pay for it, because that's important too in case you come back. But you need something called international health insurance, which will cover regular checkups, pre-existing conditions, because you disclose that when you buy this policy, mental health care, cancer treatment. Yeah, you think you're going to get back in time for whatever emergency, but that's not always the case. You know, travel insurance covers a lot of medical things, but it covers lost baggage and trip interruption and flying you home. Both of them cover flying you home for evacuation, but you cannot use Medicare. But the point is, you probably want to keep Medicare and your Part B supplement that you acquired because it was so good in case you do come home. So now you've got 2 policies. Now, it depends on the country you go to. You really want to think about this. Some countries have a national health insurance program that you can participate in if you can be considered a permanent resident. But probably you're going to get private insurance. I'm going to give you a website. We'll put this up there, called internationalinsurance.com. Internet, that's easy to remember, internationalinsurance.com.
You
Sort
said
of
it's a hospital plan, like a private hospital.
This is private international health insurance, and they deal with many companies. So it's like a clearinghouse. There are a couple of them, but you can start your search at internationalinsurance.com. You can click on all kinds of expat insurance, but particularly you want to compare different policies and see what you get. And you know what? It could cost as much as an additional $1,000 a month per person, especially if you already had a heart attack or a this or a that, because it's health rated. You can buy it, but it can be very expensive.
Okay,
And
so
again,
there goes my cost of living gets cut in half theory.
so as I said, you're just having these delightful fantasies about the cost of living being low and it being safe. And then you think about healthcare and you think, is it good healthcare? But more important, how am I going to pay for it if I'm down there? Okay, so in health insurance is a critical ingredient, and you need to price it and plan it. And then you need to also and see if it covers medical evacuation. And then you also need to keep health insurance here, because you get evacuated, you want to still have your Medicare and your supplement and your Part D drug plan. So much for retiring abroad. That's just number one objection I have. Move on, Richard. I just wanted to bring
Well,
some.
all right, as long as you're talking about your objections,
Buzzkill, what a buzzkill.
I'll
Yeah,
ask
sorry.
you about another one. How about taxes? I assume you have some concerns about that too.
Oh, let me tell you about taxes. Okay. There's a worldwide treaty, tax treaty. So here's the first question. You say now that you're going to go over there and you're going to live on your RMD, your retirement account at Fidelity. And you're going to live on your RMD and your Social Security check.
Those are your required minimum distributions from your
Yeah,
retirement.
right,
plan.
exactly. And you're not going to work. Oh, heaven forbid that you would get down there and decide to work, right? Because you're in retirement. Well, first of all, you're probably going to open a bank account down there. And that means you have to file a form every year called the FBAR form. Absolute requirement. So it says 10,000 minimum, but I think in most cases you have to file no matter what, especially if you're living overseas. And you can't forget to do that. It's not a tax, but the penalty is huge for not filing FBAR. So you're going to need some great tax advice, especially on these foreign bank accounts. Now, I'm going to show you something. This is because I couldn't think of all the things. So first of all, let me finish this. You're going to pay U.S. taxes, and you will file from abroad your U.S. taxes on the things, your dividends, your pension fund check, well, no matter where it's deposited in the U.S. or in your bank account in wherever, Ecuador, or wherever it is you're going to be. But what happens if you decide, it's a little tight here now because we're paying those insurance premiums? We could get a great job. We could serve as hosts at the international something or other, and they want to pay us, and we speak English and Spanish or whatever it is. Now you've earned income abroad. Now you really need professional tax help. So this is publication 54. I've written notes on it, but it is the U.S. tax guide for American citizens living abroad. And you are going to need help in filling out your taxes if you earn anything abroad. This gets complicated very quickly. I'm not going to devolve into all of this, but there's a foreign housing exclusion deduction. There's a foreign earned income waiver exclusion. I am telling you that if you do, you're going to need tax help. There is a great website, Taxes for Expats, and they have specialists. It's a clearinghouse for tax preparers that specialize, all these experts, in doing your tax return. But it is not like, oh, I moved from New York to Florida, and I guess things would change because you wouldn't file a New York state return and Florida has no state income tax. That's a domestic move. But now you're moving internationally, and you have to be very careful about how and when you file and whether you earn anything there. So now if you haven't been upset by having to pay for extra insurance, for health insurance, let me tell you, you're going to need a tax preparer who's an expert, especially if you earn any money down there, which makes your life so much easier, and they want you to work because you're great Americans, So there you go.
Can I follow on to that with a couple of things that
Oh,
Sure.
sure.
me with the taxes? Okay. Because, like you're saying, there are just so many there's a myriad of different complications and so forth. And the higher your tax bracket, the more complicated it gets. But like take Roth IRAs, for example, you're talking about taking the distributions out to live on. And I was talking to Brett Spencer, who's one of our advisors in our network who specializes in working with expats who have retired abroad. And obviously you're thinking you're going to be taking money out of your Roth IRA that you have at Fidelity, and you decide to make those withdrawals abroad. Other countries, take the Netherlands, for example, which I think also includes Aruba, your distributions are going to get taxed because they don't recognize the tax-free as the US does on Roth IRAs. And not only that, but in some countries, they'll even tax you on the value of the account. So, that's all the more reason why I personally suggest not just a tax preparer, but somebody who is actually in a holistic sort of financial planning advisor who can look at the whole picture, retirement picture, and go from there.
So it's not so easy, Richard. I
Well-
love the idea, Pam, of I'm going to rent an Airbnb for 3 months in Cancun or whatever it might be. But I see these, what I love? I'm really a fan of House Hunters International. I mean, I watch that late at night when I can't sleep. And I always think about, what are these people doing for their health insurance? They decided to leave their jobs in South Carolina, and now they're house hunting in the Netherlands in such and such a town. She wants to be near the city center. He likes nature. And that's all they talk about. And I always wonder, how are they going to cover their kids if they come with kids? Why are they going to deal with insurance? Is his company still paying them, or did he leave his job, or she, and now they're employed there? And what about the tax obligations they might still have in the US? It looks like so joyous. Do we want a 4-bedroom flat in the city, or could we have a whole house in the country? But boy, there's a lot more to it.
Well, I take your points that it can be complicated and there can be some downsides. I'll also say there are hundreds of thousands of Americans who are living abroad in other countries who seem very happy, and they manage to find a way to do it. And so I don't want to scare people away from it altogether either. I do think you want to go into it with your eyes open. Now, I talked to an expert about all this for the article I wrote. His name is Dan Prescher. He's a senior editor at International Living. They rate countries every year as best place to retire. And he agrees with what Pam said. He says nothing really beats trying it out for yourself. He thinks before you move abroad, you should try living abroad for a few weeks or a few months if you can do that. See what it's like, not as a tourist, but as a resident. See how much you'd like it. And he also talks about joining expat groups on Facebook and talking to people who live there about what it's like to live there compared to where they used to live, read articles about it. So I do think you really want to do your homework. And I guess along those lines, I'll just ask Pam and Terry, is there anything else you would tell people to do as far as research when they want to look into a place that they're thinking about retiring abroad, but they're not sure?
Yeah.
Pam?
Can I just jump in? I want to add a couple of other follow-ons I was talking to Brett about that I never would have thought about. This is not reasons to not move abroad. These are things you have to think about. He reminded me of something no one ever says, which is you're probably going to need a whole new round of estate planning documents when you do move. And I'm not talking about trying it out like I want to do. I'm talking about moving there, because they have their own laws about how your assets get distributed, and they are different. So you're probably going to have to look at a whole new round of estate planning docs. And another tip is, figure out which bank, like Terry said, it takes a long time to set up the bank account. Figure out which bank you think you want to use and get that account set up beforehand. Keep your bank here, bank account here, and don't think you're going to move over there and set up a bank account, because it could take you 2-3 months, because for some reason, foreign banks don't really like working with Americans. And whatever that's about, I don't know. But to answer your question and just kind of wrap up on your question about research, I mean, I don't think for me, I don't have any one source. I look at all the publications, Travel and Leisure. I look at all the indexes and all the, highest ranked places, and they take a well-rounded view of safety, of healthcare, of taxes, of what people say, boots on the ground. I kind of take it all in, and then I compare it with people who I know who are actually living in Portugal or actually living in Mexico. And I ask them what it's really like. And that's why the only thing I can say is my research is going to come from me when I stick my big toe in the water. And then, okay. And then the only last thing I'm going to say about this, because I've given it a lot of thought, I don't want to be a property owner in retirement. No, thanks. No, thanks. Those days are over. I already own a house here. If I'm there, give me the freedom. I just want to rent. Isn't that part of the nomad part? Isn't that part of the whole fun of it? Is you're renting, you don't have all that responsibility. So that's what I look at.
Okay, that makes sense. Terry, anything else you want to add? I've got a couple of thoughts.
One distinction. Yeah, I want to make one distinction here. We're talking about retiring abroad. We are not talking about giving up your US citizenship. And you should be very, very clear about that. If you decide to give up your US citizenship, you are taxed. All your wealth, everything is taxed as if you had died. If estate taxes are due and so forth, that is a kind of an irrevocable decision, and it's a huge financial decision. I won't go into all the aspects of it. But what you're talking about, I want to retire abroad. So if you're not thinking of giving up your citizenship and that's goodbye America, what you're thinking about is what extended period of time and at what age would it be best to do this? Yeah, it would be a lot better to be doing this at age 67 to 70 than from age 82 to 85, because there's so many more health concerns and estate planning concerns and other concerns. So timing not only of when you go, but how long you stay, and then how you leave stuff so that if it's time to come back, you can come back without a hassle. And that goes to not owning property, Pam, for example, and having tax consequences. It goes to not giving up your bank account. It goes to maybe having a P.O. box if you're selling your home here, at least a place where you can retrieve mail or your adult kids can retrieve mail for you. This is probably not going to be forever, as much as you'd love to enjoy it in paradise forever. So think about returning sometime later when things like health and other issues become important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. Retiring abroad, it doesn't mean that necessarily has to be the last place you're going to live. And I like, excuse me, I like Pam's idea of renting and then having the chance to explore places. You might find that you've tried out a country or a neighborhood or a city and it was okay, but it wasn't quite right for you. So then maybe a year later, you'll try someplace else and maybe you'll end up moving back to the United States, or maybe you'll move to Portugal, who knows where.
It's part of the fun of it to me. That's
Yeah.
part of the fun of the retirement living abroad is hopping around
Right.
a little bit.
Right. So I would just finish by saying the annual best places to retire abroad lists are going to be coming out in early January. The two that I look at every year are the one from Live and Invest Overseas and the one from International Living. I would just tell people, I would recommend you look at them if you're thinking about this, but I would really recommend you think about their methodology compared to your methodology. In other words, they'll tell you what they factor into what makes a best place to retire abroad. That may or may not be what you think is great as a best place for you to retire abroad. You may have very different ideas about what you want in weather or how you're going to spend your
And
time.
how much you can afford, because you know
That
what?
too.
But
Yeah.
I promised I was going to say one last thing before, but
Go.
you know, the friends that I have who live abroad and they are retired because they retired early, one is living, sort of like, I don't know, kind of hippie-ish, if you will. Like money is not the big thing. The other is the opposite, right? They've got this big lifestyle. So you're listening to your friends and they're describing something to you and you're thinking, oh, that's me. But, it has to match up with your finances too. Like I
Right.
said, taxes.
Right. And what you want out of life and how you like to spend your days. Everybody's different. The other thing I want to mention is many of these places that are particularly popular among expats have discounts specifically for expat retirees. Not everyone, but many of them do. So I would say to look into that too, because it may be that a place you're thinking about moving will give you some breaks on the cost of transportation, entertainment, healthcare even. So look into those because you may get some breaks because you're moving there as an expat. But I'll go back to where I started, which is, as Ecuador has shown, places can change. A place that was the best place to retire 3 years ago may not be the best place today. and the place that's best today may not be the best 3 years from now. So thanks for joining us today on Friends Talk Money. Hope you have a great retirement and love living wherever you decide to live.
Friends Talk Money is funded in part by a grant from the Investor Protection Trust. The IPT is a nonprofit organization devoted to investor education. Since 1993, the IPT has worked with the states to provide the independent, objective investor education needed by all Americans to make informed investment decisions. Visit investorprotection.org. We also receive support from the North American Securities Administrators Association, known as NASA. It's the oldest international investor protection organization. NASA's members include state and provincial securities regulators from the U.S., Canada, and Mexico who serve on the front lines of investor protection. Recognizing that education and awareness are powerful tools in the fight against investment fraud, NASA is pleased to sponsor Friends Talk Money. Here are 3 important tips to help you protect your money from fraud. With investing, there are always risks, so be cautious of anybody telling you that a certain investment is guaranteed. You should also proceed with caution if somebody is promising very large investment returns. This is a common red flag for investment fraud. Last and most importantly, be sure you're working with a licensed or registered financial professional. You can check your advisor and make sure they're licensed by visiting brokercheck.finra.org. NASA is your partner in keeping you safe and helping you avoid investment frauds. Visit nasa.org and click on the Investor Education tab to learn more.